These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart-healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by N.B. Turner. It's titled, Is China an Imperialist Country? And it's from a relatively Marxist point of view. I think you'll find it fascinating. This is from the introduction. It has long been known and understood that the entire world has been under the control of capitalist imperialism. For a time, a section of this world broke from it, beginning with the victory of socialism in Russia and continuing through the Chinese Revolution, constituting a socialist world. Yet in time, the socialist countries, through internal class struggles in politics and economics, were seized by capitalist conciliators and advocates, and then by capitalists themselves, who were largely within the ruling communist parties themselves. First in Russia and later in China, when these counter-revolutions and coups took place, there ensued a period of entry and integration into the world imperialist system. The Soviet Union, at first under the existing signboard of socialism, continued much of its established national and economic power relations into a new socialist imperialist bloc, socialist in name, imperialist in reality. The Russian capitalist imperialist attempt to maintain this bloc, or important sections of what had been part of this bloc and its historic allies, has continued in the years since the socialist signboard was discarded. In China, the defeat of the proletariat and the capitalist capture of state power after the death of the great revolutionary Mao Zedong have also led to a period of integration into the world imperialist system. China still operates under a socialist signboard, but has conducted itself unambiguously as a capitalist power. Before the last decade, especially since the demise of the socialist bloc, the U.S. was commonly seen as the sole superpower to which all other powers had to defer. The system which the U.S. had designed at the end of World War II was global in scope and to some more democratic in appearance than the old colonial empires. But it was built around the elitist privilege of power and authority, meaning the U.S. as superpower was at the centerpiece of the controls. But in the last decade, the imperialist world system is not what it used to be. Throughout the world, corrupt and comprador regimes have faced significant and often unprecedented mass popular opposition movements, which have revealed the deep instability of the old neo-colonialist arrangements. Even in the EU, the product of imperialist designs to supplant the historic internecine battles, there has emerged ever-deepening crises and conflicts and movements to assert nationalist interests against one another. Against the threat of Islamic fundamentalism, the imperialist system was directed by the U.S., has launched wars such as in Iraq and Afghanistan at huge cost, trillions of dollars, and immeasurable losses in political credibility and imperialist authority, as neither war has won any of the U.S.'s objectives. These clear failures at the hand of the largest and most powerful military force in the world do not bode well for maintaining the U.S.'s hegemonic domination of the world's imperialist system. And the economic and financial crises of the last half decade or more have stirred not only deep discontent, resentment, and popular political opposition within the ranks of the U.S.'s reliable allies, but it has brought to the fore the imperialist anti-U.S. challenges from other major powers, specifically China and Russia. Forces worldwide are studying these changes and considering how they must change the set of options at hand. The all too prevalent view that U.S. imperialism is so powerful, so dominant, and so capable of manipulating all manner of forces and bending them to its will has been, and continues to be, a dangerous twisting of reality. The sole superpower in this view has been attributed with omnipotent features that defy effective challenge, that reflect a supposedly skillful control of contradictions and crises that afflicted earlier empires, and that has a boundless ability to disguise its malevolent work. If it were true, it would be a remarkable development in human history. Indeed, it would be, as once touted in the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union en bloc by Francis Fukuyama, the end of history. That is, the end of historical conflict and systemic changes. It would be an expression of the boastful and fanciful capitalist post-Mao motto, TINA, there is no alternative to capitalism. There are others who assert that the U.S. is not so omnipotent and that it is in decline and maybe failing, but that the U.S. and its close allies constitute the only imperialism that matters, and that if all its detractors, victims, opponents, and its imperialist rivals band together, liberation will truly be achieved with the demise of U.S. imperialism. This view also holds that whenever big powers like China or Russia rise in opposition to the U.S., they deserve the support and applause from progressive and revolutionary forces. Holding this view are a variety of forces who cling to the notion that the Cold War division of the world is still extant, and that popular protests in recent years from Libya to Syria, Ukraine and Venezuela, as well as Brazil and Turkey, Iran, even inside Western China, are all examples of U.S. meddling and desperate interference. This view holds that without such U.S. manipulation and interference and disruption, the people would, by and large, be happy or passive. This is by any measure an amazing claim, denying the existence of class contradictions and struggles within each of these countries, and making it appear that the conspiratorial powers of the U.S. to manipulate events are unparalleled in reach and effectiveness. In practical political terms, this view distorts the basic reality. Is China an imperialist country?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about today. Welcome to the program. I want to start out with what happened yesterday. I think this is a really important thing to discuss, and also the inescapable truth about right-wing billionaires and Donald Trump. Professor Richard Wolff will be with us in the second hour, talking about how white rage may connect to economics. Greg Palast will be with us in the third hour, talking about his new discovery of what is beginning to look like the contours of an actual conspiracy, including some elected Republicans, to try to end our form of government. I mean, just think about that for a minute. It's breathtaking. And Latricea Adams is going to be here on the, finally, charges against Governor Snyder of Michigan, albeit misdemeanor charges with a $1,000 fine and possibly 1 year in jail, which, hey, he's a rich white guy. Is that going to happen? This is America, after all. But anyhow, we're going to talk about that in our third hour. But I wanted to start out by pointing out what actually happened yesterday, because I've been watching the media and I've not been seeing anybody actually talking about this, which I find frankly shocking. We had a group of people. Well, let me back up a little. We start out with the big lie. All right, the big lie is that there's voter fraud in the United States. There isn't. There's never been any study ever with any credibility at all in the history of the United States, or at least in the history of my lifetime, that shows that there is any kind of substantial number of people who are illegally voting, who are not citizens, or who are voting twice, or who are voting in the names of people who are dead, things like that. George W. Bush spent 2.5 years looking for this. Seven of his federal prosecutors, his U.S. attorneys, refused to drop everything and look for voter fraud, and he fired them. Remember that? It was a big scandal in 2002. And he ultimately had all 100 U.S. attorneys at the top of their list, hiring staff to find voter fraud in their district, in the northern part of Alabama, in the southern part of New York, in the eastern district of Colorado, whatever it may be. He had attorneys on it. And they spent years and millions, tens of millions of dollars trying to find voter fraud in the United States. They examined over 1 billion votes over a decade, and they found 31 cases. 31. And the majority of those were people who didn't realize they were committing voter fraud, in quotes, because they were people who either didn't realize that having moved out of state, they got an absentee ballot and they still continue to vote where they used to live. That was like 1 or 2 of those 31 people. Try to explain it, I can't. But the majority of them were people who had felony convictions, who lived in states where felons can't vote, which is only, about 1/3 of our states. And they didn't realize that that was the law in those states. The number of people who voted who weren't citizens was 0. I mean, what person who's in this country illegally is going to show up at a federal, facility or a state-run facility, voting facility, and say, "Hi, I'm here, to vote"? Nobody. So we've got this big lie that the GOP has been pushing for 40 years. Donald Trump took that big lie and put it on steroids. He took a little balloon and pumped it into a weather balloon. I mean, he just into the Graf Zeppelin. He blew this thing way up and said, well, not only that, and he did this 5 years ago. When he started during the primary, when he started talking about how the whole system is rigged. And then 4 years ago, after he won the election, when he said that Hillary Clinton got 3 million votes that were illegally cast. He said it during the primary. When he lost the New Hampshire primary, he said it was because black people were coming in buses from Massachusetts up to New Hampshire to vote against him. These were all lies. And he continues to promote this lie, as does virtually the entire Republican Party, that there was, quote, voter fraud. And therefore there's like Ted Cruz or Josh Hawley or Kevin McCarthy, or yesterday Jim Jordan kept saying, but we have concerns. That's horse crap. They know exactly what they're doing. They're using this myth of voter fraud to pass more and more restrictive laws in the states to make it harder and harder for low-income people, black people, Hispanic people, students, and elderly people to vote, because those people all tend to vote Democratic. It's just that simple. But as a consequence of all these people believing that the election was stolen from them, because they're listening to right-wing hate radio, they're watching Fox News, they're listening to Donald Trump, and they're listening to their elected Republican representatives who are telling them, we should all have big concerns here. These people stormed the Capitol building literally to kidnap or kill members of Congress. And yesterday, back to where I started this whole rant, and yesterday, 197 members of Congress voted to say that's just fine. You get that? That's just fine. No problem. We're not going to impeach the guy who told the lie, who expanded the lie, who amplified the lie, because it's our lie, is what these Republicans, these 197 Republicans who voted to acquit or not to impeach Donald Trump yesterday in the House of Representatives. That's what's going on. Voltaire, back in 1765, in a booklet, essentially, that he wrote called Questions sur les miracles. I can't speak French, forgive my terrible pronunciation. But basically, questions about miracles. He said, and this is the English translation. I have the French here. Certainement qui est en droit, but my French is so terrible I won't inflict it on you. Anyhow, he said, formerly there were those who said, you believe things that are incomprehensible, inconsistent, impossible, because we have commanded you to believe them. Go then and do what is unjust because we command it. Such people show admirable reasoning. This is Voltaire, the 18th century philosopher. Truly, he continues, whoever can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. If the God-given understanding of your mind does not resist a demand to do what is impossible, then you will not resist a demand to do wrong to that God-given sense of justice in your heart. As soon as one faculty of your soul has been dominated, other faculties will follow as well. And all this derives, Voltaire said, from those crimes of religion which have overrun the world. But his point, if somebody can make you believe something that's absurd, they can make you commit atrocities. And that's what happened on January 6th, is people who were believing these 197 members of Congress who continue to tell them the election was stolen, showed up at the Capitol and said, okay, that's it, we're taking over. And apparently it was an extensive conspiracy. And as I said, we're going to get into that with Greg Palast in the second hour. But Ayanna Presley's staff, they had put panic buttons throughout, in every office, because you never know. People can walk in, you've got to go through the metal detector, but people can walk in off the street and say, I'd like to speak to my representative or somebody there. And, it could be a crazy person. So they've got panic buttons. Well, as they were moving around chairs and water coolers to try to barricade the doors as the traitors, as the insurrectionists were storming the Capitol, they discovered that all the panic buttons had been removed. I mean, this is nuts. This is insane. I don't know how to describe it beyond that. It's just, it's like, where do you go with that? Anyhow, we'll be back right in just a minute. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. Stick around. And welcome back, 15 minutes past the hour. By the way, just a quick note. If you've called in before and we've got you in our database, I'll be able to grab your call and put you on the air. If you haven't, then I won't, because Joyce injured her wrist this morning, and so I'm kind of running this thing all by myself. That said, Virginia, in Bassett, Virginia, you have called in before. Virginia, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Professor Thomas. Thom Hartmann. I have a question. Can Trump give out pardons after having been impeached? And if the Senate convicts Trump for incitement of insurrection, does the Senate have the authority to just send Trump to jail?
The Senate does not have the authority to send him to jail, and whether he can issue pardons between now and whenever the Senate trial happens is something that nobody knows for sure, because it's never been adjudicated. Nobody's ever figured that out. So, we're not quite sure. Virginia is the answer, I guess, to the question, of whether or not Donald Trump can do pardons.
Can he go to jail? Can he go to jail?
He could go to jail, but it wouldn't be the Senate who would send him there. It would have to be a prosecutor, whether a federal prosecutor or a state prosecutor. There would have to be a specific crime laid out. There's little doubt in my mind that Donald Trump is facing absolute financial ruin and the probability of going to jail, along with his children. I mean, these guys have been, this little merry band has been engaged in a massive grift for years. And for for arguably, well, not even arguably, I'd say for decades. And, you know, we just kind of have to keep that in mind. Virginia, thank you very much for the call. Let's see here. Dion in Chicago. Hey, Dion, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good. What's up?
Yeah, I know this may be a little extreme, but, like, I know the Treasury, there's codes for treason, and then, like, could the insurrectionists also be charged for a biological weapon for carrying a virus on purpose to do harm to others?
That's an interesting question, Jim, and frankly, I'm wondering if the Republican members of Congress who refused to wear masks when they were in lockdown with other people, with the Democrats, thus causing now 3 Democrats to test positive, and the husband of a fourth, Ayanna Presley's husband, is now testing positive. He was there apparently in that lockdown. What level of culpability, what level of responsibility do these guys have? This is the kind of stuff that's never been tried in a court of law, so we don't know. But Nancy Pelosi is putting fines into place right now for people who refuse to wear masks, and substantial fines for people who are refusing to use the magnetometer, who are refusing, who are essentially trying to carry guns into the Capitol building, because that's what's going on. And we should just call it what it is. But, how that's going to shake out, Dion, I don't have an answer for that. Dion, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be back. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, and I'll be continuing. I've got, a little more rant here, and then we'll be picking up the phone calls after the break at the bottom of the hour. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So nuclear power is being sold as the thing that's going to save us from climate change. It's not. Not only does it take mind-boggling amounts of carbon to even build a nuclear power plant, all that concrete, all that steel, all that stuff that has to be hauled in and transported, and then you got to mine the uranium, and then you got to ship it, and all this kind of stuff. But now the industry is out with their hand out. 20 years ago, we subsidized the industry to the tune of $100 billion, and that's not the unquantifiable amount from the Price-Anderson Act, where we insure nuclear power plants as well. These are just subsidies, and now we've got a whole set of brand new subsidies that companies in New York and Ohio and Pennsylvania and New Jersey are coming to the ratepayers. It's mind-boggling. We've got a whole video about it, that lays out all the details for our supporters over at thomhartmann.com, and you can get over there and check it out. It's pretty amazing stuff, and nuclear power, no panacea. In fact, it's a big problem. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Welcome back. I also wanted to talk about the rant that I posted today over at thomhartmann.medium.com. And it's titled, actually, The Inescapable Truth About Right-Wing Billionaires and Trump. And I start out by asking the question, first of all, pointing out that there's a bunch of very, very wealthy people who have been subsidizing Donald Trump and his merry band of supporters in the Republican Party. And, why would they do this? Why would these very wealthy people play a game of Russian roulette with the United States of America and its citizens? Why would they take such a chance on destroying democracy all around the world? Because if American democracy falls, the democracies of a lot of other countries are going to follow right behind it. We are the standard. We are the example for the world, or at least we were. So why would these right-wing billionaires be doing this, and multimillionaires? They proclaim that it's about libertarian or conservative ideology, but I think not. I don't think it's ideology. I think it's that they want to maintain the Reaganomics, trickle-down, austerity, neoliberal economic system that the United States flipped into in 1981. We were running on basic classic economics, Adam Smith economics from 1933 until 1980. And things were working pretty good. And the rich were paying their fair share of taxes. A third of all tax revenues during the Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Carter administrations, Ford, a third of all of the revenue coming into the federal government was coming from corporate taxes. Right now it's around 6%. Wealthy people were as they started to make literally tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars a year, it pushed them into the top tax bracket where they were paying, at the time that Reagan came into office in 1981, they were paying 74% income tax. So rather than do that, they would just keep the money in their companies and build their companies and pay their employees well, because, hey, what else can you do? And Reagan dropped that top tax rate, both for capital gains and for ordinary income, down to 25%, and suddenly it was off to the races. According to the Rand Corporation, $50 trillion that today would be in the pockets of working class people instead went into the pockets of the very, very rich. I mean, it's mind-boggling. I've got a link to that Rand Report study, Rand Corporation study, in this article over at thomhartmann.medium.com. Thus, as a result of this, Stadia, the big statistics sites on the internet, said, and I quote, "The number of billionaires in the U.S. has increased tenfold during this time." They were looking, this was published in 2013, and it was looking at 1987, the last year of the Reagan administration, or next to the last year, till 2012. Okay. The number of U.S. billionaires in the U.S. has increased tenfold during this time of 87 to 2012, from 41 billionaires in 1987 to 425 billionaires in 2012. Well, today there's over 650 billionaires in the United States. And here's what they want to keep in place. Number one, there's two ways you can tax the money that people get. If it's ordinary income, that's called the income tax. If it's, wages from working your brain or your muscles. If it's interest in income or dividend income, you pay a capital gains tax on profits that you make on that income. It's a different kind of tax. Well, the capital gains tax is lower than the ordinary income tax, and Donald Trump had promised a couple of months ago that if he remained president after January 20th, he would lower the capital gains rate to 15%. Secondly, average Americans pay a tax every year on their wealth. The largest store of wealth that most working class people have, 66% of Americans, working class Americans, own their own homes. That's their largest store of wealth. And every year, people like you and me who own their homes, or if you're renting, you're actually paying the same tax in your rent, embedded in your rent, pay a wealth tax. We pay a tax on our wealth. We pay a percentage of the value of our houses to the state and local government as a wealth tax. So how much is the wealth tax on a billionaire's money bin on their investment portfolio? Zero. There's no wealth tax on multimillionaires and billionaires, on their asset base, on their wealth. Yeah, they may pay some income tax or property tax on their homes, but their homes are typically such a tiny slice of their overall portfolio that it's relatively meaningless. So right now, the situation is that billionaires pay very, very low income tax rates. Many of them pay no income tax. Look at Donald Trump. And they pay no wealth tax. Whereas working class people are paying, a solid income tax in the 20% range, plus, a 6% a percentage of tax on FICA, on Social Security, plus a wealth tax every year in the form of property taxes. And the billionaires support Trump because they want to keep it that way.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's all about the money. I'll be back with more news of the day and your calls right after this. Our book in today's Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye. Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, just weeks before he was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his annual message to Congress. Lincoln firmly believed that the United States had an historic responsibility to demonstrate to the world that people can govern themselves, make equal rights not just a self-evident truth, but a manifest one, and create a political and economic order in which working people, both white and black, are not compelled to bow to anyone, neither aristocrats nor capitalists. Empowered by tens of thousands of black slaves who were already liberating themselves from bondage by escaping to the Union lines, and increasingly confident that the majority of his fellow Americans would recognize the truth of what he was saying, Lincoln closed his address by calling on them to see that the time had come to remember who they were and what they demanded, or what that demanded. He told them that to save the nation and all that it represented, they must live up to the nation's declared revolutionary purpose and promise, and act to radically enhance American freedom by bringing an end to slavery. This is a quote from Lincoln's address. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We too, end of quote from Lincoln. Back to Harvey. We too cannot escape history. Our own struggle to save the nation and the promise it proclaims has begun. Finally, after more than 40 years of fear-driven class war and culture war campaigns against the democratic achievements of generations, the hard-won rights of workers, women and people of color, and the very memory of how they were secured, and now both in the wake of the election debacle of 2016, which gave the presidency to the corrupt, mendacious, racist, sexist, and treacherous demagogue Donald Trump, and continued control of Congress to the formerly conservative but increasingly reactionary Republican Party, and in the face of intensified class and culture war campaigns, we the people have come not only to recognize that American democratic life is in jeopardy, but also to mobilize in hopes of saving it. Millions of us have rallied to the resistance and expressed our democratic fears and desires in action. In the historic Women's March and March for Our Lives of young people, the protests, demonstrations, and legal actions to defend the lives and rights of immigrants and refugees, the Me Too movement to combat sexual assault and harassment, the massive teachers' strikes for higher pay and better funding of public schools in states red and blue, and the enthusiastic canvassing and campaigning for a blue wave to win back Congress in the 2018 midterm elections. But resistance is not enough. The time has come for us to remember who we are and what that demands. The time has come for us to embrace our radical history, the history of how a generation of Americans, high and low, and in all their diversity, not only turned their colonial rebellion into a war for independence, but also imbued American life, whether they all intended it or not, with radical imperative and impulse by declaring a revolutionary promise of freedom, equality, and democracy for all. The history of how generations of radicals and reformers served as the prophetic memory of that promise, and how generations of ordinary men and women, native-born and immigrant, struggled to make real the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to expand not only the we in We the People, but also the powers of the people. And most especially in view of the crises we ourselves face, the history of how our greatest generations confronted and prevailed over the forces that threatened to destroy the nation and bury its revolutionary promise in the 1770s, 1860s, and 1930s and 1940s, not to mention the 1960s, by acting to make the United States both inspired by Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and pushing them to go farther than they might otherwise have gone. Radically freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. The time has come to take hold of that history and make America radical again. I've titled this collection of my speeches and essays, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, for reasons that will become obvious, and yet I cannot help but confess that if I had had to title it otherwise, I would have been sorely tempted to use, with full attribution, the title Max Lerner gave to his 1938 work, It Is Later Than You Think, The Need for a Militant Democracy. While it may not seem so, the crisis we face is no less demanding of action, urgent action, than that which confronted his generation. The book Take Hold of Our History by Harvey J. Kaye.
The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, yeah, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream.
So we just put up a new video for our the supporters of our program. It's over at thomhartmann.com, or the links to it are over at thomhartmann.com. And basically what I was talking about in it is, kind of starting with the old saying from the late 60s, early 70s, what if they gave a war and no one came? What if a bunch of right-wing thugs showed up itching for a fight and were completely ignored? Historically, one of the most powerful ways to put someone down, essentially, is to shun them. In fact, expelling people from communities among indigenous people is one of the worst punishments that there was. You turn your back on a dog when it's misbehaving, and it immediately gets that it's being shunned. We just need to shun these right-wingers. That's where we need to start. So anyhow, you can check out the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. And thanks so much for supporting our program. We really do appreciate it. It's all over at thomhartmann.com.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, what a day, huh? It's and what a time. One other bit of news, as it were, that I wanted to share with you, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here. This was a tweet from Eric Fengi Ding, Fengi-Ding. I may be mispronouncing his name. My apologies if so. But he's been very outspoken about COVID and what's going on. And there's this new variant. We're seeing just explosions in COVID infections happening all around the world right now. China just locked down 22 million people. But here's what Dr. It's F-E-I-G-L, Feigelding. Here's what Dr. Feigelding tweeted. He said, Australia suddenly saw 5 infections of the UK B117 variant among 4 quarantined travelers and a cleaner on the same floor. This is of a hotel. Say, if you fly into Australia right now, you have to spend the first 2 weeks in a hotel in quarantine. You literally can't leave your room. They have guards in the halls. Can't leave your room. You have no contact with anybody. And he says, so Australia suddenly saw 5 infections of this new variant, B117, among 4 quarantined travelers and a cleaner on the same floor. But get this, none of the 5 people occupied the same room. The old original COVID was relatively not contagious. Relatively speaking, it wasn't all that contagious. And so you would have to inhale a huge quantity of the virus for it to set up shop in your body. It appears that the virus has gotten, because there's been a change, the mutation was on the spike protein. It appears that mutation means that the virus can hook into your body much, much more easily. So just a few little tiny particles of virus rather than thousands or even millions that you would normally need to create an infection. Just, a much smaller number. Nobody knows what this number is. This is the research they're doing right now, but apparently a much smaller number. And therefore, the little wisp of breath you might get from somebody who was 6 feet away didn't used to contain enough viruses. Even though there was virus in it, it didn't contain enough to really infect you. Now it does with this B117 variant. Different parts of the same building. If it has a circulating air system and it's circulating the air while you're in that building, the virus will move from room to room if all of this proves out. And it sure looks like it is, as we're seeing this thing explode all over the world, which is going to be very concerning news, like for people who live in hotels and apartment buildings, high density housing. And that's what China is freaking out about in a big way right now, too. And the final point I want to make, my whole rant about billionaires and taxes and everything, there is a piece that feeds white rage in this, and that is the $50 trillion that the billionaire class took out of the pockets, and the very, very wealthy took out of the pockets of the middle class over the last 40, 45 years. This fuels this whole kind of right wage thing. And when Donald Trump came into office, there were programs to identify and combat white extremism. Donald Trump shut them all down. There's an article in The Atlantic about this. This was back in 2018, Peter Beinart. The headline, Trump shut programs to counter violent extremism. We've known now for 4 years, well, we've known for 3 years anyway, that Donald Trump shut down programs that within the government and programs funded by the government designed to track and push back on white racist violence. And Donald Trump shut those down. Just like, we had a playbook to deal with the pandemic that Obama left him. He threw it away and fired all the people, closed the departments, both in the one in the White House to deal with pandemics and the one in the National Security Administration to deal with the pandemic, or the Office of National Security. I mean, this is just nuts. Anyhow, pick up your phone calls here. Marty in Wixom, Michigan. Hey, Marty, it's been a long time since I've heard the name Wixom. I've been through your town once. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I love your show. Another little nostalgia for you. My father worked for WJIM Radio back in the mid-'50s.
Oh, wow. I worked for WJIM TV in the mid-'60s.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that. And I lived for many years in East Lansing, so very familiar with that.
Yeah, that's when radio and television were local. That the owners of that station named the station after their son. Their son, his name was Jim, and he was born about a year before they built that station, that radio and TV station, and they named it after him, which I always thought was kind of cute. Anyhow, what's up, Marty?
Well, I'd like to make a point that I just haven't heard mentioned much in the media in all their discussion about Trump's claims about election fraud and the resulting riot and so forth. And that is that people really need to apply common sense to the election result. Donald Trump has never been supported by a majority of the Americans. He won in 2016 with only 46.1% of the vote. He barely squeaked.
And that was only half of the potential American electorate.
That's right. And once in office, he presided over a complete failure of the worst health epidemic in 100 years, far more infections and deaths than any other country. He also presided over the worst economic recession since the Great Depression. Tens of millions of persons losing their jobs, hundreds of thousands of people in line to pick up food baskets. His popularity rating never even hit 50% for his entire presidency, and his approval rating was in the low 40s when the election occurred. Moreover, all of the traditional pre-election polls showed him losing nationwide and in all of the battleground states. So with all of that, why would anyone think that it required massive fraud for him to be defeated in the election?
Because Trump and 197 Republicans in the House of Representatives and all but 2 or 3 Republicans in the United States Senate have been saying ever since Election Day, we think there's something skeezy. We think they're up to something. And they've been saying this, in part because they don't want to suffer the wrath of Donald Trump. But also they've been saying it because they can't not say it. Because for 40 years, the Republican Party has been using the big lie of voter fraud to make it harder and harder for black people in particular, and secondarily Hispanics, students, and Social Security voters to vote. I mean, for example, here's one simple example. They don't want people on Social Security to vote, and the way you know that is they say your driver's license can't have expired. Well, what happens when people get into their 80s? They stop driving. They let the driver's license expire. It's still your driver's license. It's still got your picture on it. It's still a state-issued ID. But no, you can't use that to vote anymore because we don't want Social Security voters. The Republicans have been very strategic about this for 40 years now. And so they can't just come out and say, oh, there was no voter fraud. Donald Trump actually lost the election by 7 million votes. Joe Biden actually won it. They can't say that because they would have to admit that for 40 years they've been lying to everybody.
And I think that, people just need to use their common sense. There was no need for fraud for him to lose. He was on his way to losing regardless.
I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. Marty, thanks a lot for the call. Jim in Long Beach, California. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, great. I really appreciate your presenting information as a public education service, and that's where the common sense has fallen off the cliff long ago. I'm going to get to this question I'd like to ask you. Wondering what
we have a little less than a minute, Jim. Okay, let's get right to it.
I will. Trump needs to call off the Sunday attacks. So there has to be some kind of pressure and negotiation happening. Are you aware of that? Because if that happens, take it from there.
You're talking about the 17th.
All the capitals in the country, state capitals are.
This is mostly from that bizarre conspiracy group, because the 17th letter of the alphabet is Q.
He has to call it off.
I don't think he'll do that. I think Donald Trump is trying to punish America right now. We did not give him our votes, and he hates us.
One last deal. Offer him some kind of a deal.
I'm not that frightened that I'm willing to let Donald Trump skate. I'm just speaking for myself, but I'm guessing that that's also true of state attorneys general all across the country. And at the federal level, God only knows. I mean, he's got a part-timer in there as our attorney general now. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I'll be back with your calls in just a minute. If your call gets picked up and you don't hear from anybody, just hang out. We'll get right to you. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind?
Hey, Professor, I was listening to you the other day, and you touched my heart. Them folks that we rightfully call terrorists, traitors, or insurrectionists, they're victims, too. I was listening to you, and you were talking about, for 4 years, if we were listening to people tell us how the election was stolen from Hillary Clinton, and if we were employing the same tone that Fox Divisive News is employing or the White Nationalist Channel was employing, hey, you know what? I might have been in Washington. I might have got me a bus ticket with no hotel reservations and showed up. So in many respects, and I got this from you now, and these people mentally, their minds were trained, conditioned, and programmed. 4 years of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Come on. So, we got to think about that. So when we're going to roll some heads, okay, we got to roll them at the top, my brother. We can't just go down here and get the lower fruit.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, all these guys who showed up at the Capitol are being arrested and charged with all kinds of crimes, but I haven't seen any of these members of Congress who have been promulgating the lie that brought those people to the Capitol being, even interrogated, much less let off in handcuffs. Maybe they are being, but I'm not seeing it.
Well, this is what I'm saying on YouTube. If Donald Trump goes down, so should Fox Divisive News. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm with you, Morris. I'm totally with you. Thank you very much for the call. Let's see here. Nick in Santa Barbara. Hey, Nick, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for getting my call. So I have observation. Democracy, it's like love. It needs both sides to participate. And Trump, he knows nothing but rape. Why he has 20 women accusing him of rape. And I didn't hear anything about yesterday on the Congress hearing, nobody said about anything about his personality. He's a rapist. He doesn't share. He just go and take. Democracy, it's a love story. It's a messy. Anyway, that's what I want to say.
That's a great metaphor, Nick. I really love that a democracy is like a relationship, and if both people in the relationship don't work to make the relationship work, the relationship eventually falls apart. And similarly, if we don't have people who disagree within a democracy at least working together to try to either resolve their disagreements or achieve a compromise about their disagreements, then democracy falls apart. I mean, that's brilliant. Did that just pop into your head?
Yeah, well, I'm Christian, but I'm very progressive in the same time. So I'm not the majority of Christians.
Jesus was the first liberal.
I agree with you. Yeah, and in the Bible it says, if you don't care for each other, you are not one of me. So, you have nothing to do with me. You can't save yourself by just piling on your own. You need to help to help yourself to help. Anyway, but between lust and love, it's a huge difference, because love is sacrificial. Lust is just selfish. We need to think about these things. If I love my wife, and I need to make her love me, I can't just tell her, boss, or she, and same thing. It's like we need to work together, and democracy is very fragile, like love.
I'm with you. Nick, I love that. Not to overuse the word, but that's just a marvelous. I'm not sure if that's a metaphor or a simile or an analogy, but or all of the three, but it's brilliant. Nick, thank you. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. There's so much news coming out of the Trump administration, so much corruption, so many crimes. Now they're letting people kill endangered species. Now they're selling off, the Arctic National Wildlife Preserve refuge to big oil companies. Now they're they're authorizing pesticides that we know cause birth defects and damage to children. It's just, step after step after step, that it's so easy to forget that back in July of 2020, it was reported that Jared Kushner and Mike Pence's nephew, John Pence, created a couple of LLCs, American-Made Media Consultants Corporation, that took $617 million of Trump campaign cash, and nobody knows where it went. I'm telling you, these guys are professional grifters. We need to keep an eye on it. There's a whole rant about it over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today? Joan, you are on the air. I am not hearing Joan. You've got to be sure to listen to your phone, not your radio or television, because there is a delay. Courtney in Brooklyn, New York, watching us on Facebook Live. Hey, Courtney, what's up?
Hello, good afternoon, Tom. Just commenting on this whole issue with Trump and how Mitch McConnell is putting a filibuster on proceedings and delaying everything until January 19th. Although they're saying that he's coming around and he's actually separating his support from Donald Trump. Well,
maybe he's trying to play both sides of both sides. He let it be leaked a few days ago that he would consider voting for impeachment. Then yesterday he came out and said he hasn't made up his mind yet. He's just playing both sides against the middle.
I see. And on another note, with this whole with the whole issue with these rioters, and it's proper terminology calling them domestic terrorists, and with the with the classification that they're in, and a lot of their actions display the tendency of the KKK. But I'm not going to focus on that too much. My comment is, this is an opportunity for people to, be still and, find their own point of views and voice. And you made comments about advertisements and, this flood of advertisements that's affecting our minds subconsciously. When it comes to demographics and everything, I believe they're more affecting demographics on a micro scale rather than a macro scale when it comes to labels and things. Racial demographics are like mainstream, and it's very stereotypical. I think the real demographics that matter are like physical demographics, because these are the things that we see in our advertisements that that control our preferences. So
you're talking about, are you talking about how up until maybe 10 or 15 years ago, virtually all television advertising was virtually all white, and now it's becoming diverse? Is that your point?
Yes, in a way, but it's coerced in a way, because before you're right, there was predominantly white advertisement, but now they're making them more diverse. But if people pay attention, I've taken mass media and I've taken public speaking. This refers more to mass media. I remember the professor saying everything that you see on the TV is there for a reason. So the types of people that you see on these advertisements is there for a reason, and it's not really what you see, but it's what you don't is what people don't see. And
the types of people that are on there are. I'm sorry. Finish your thought, Courtney. My apologies.
Well, the only point that I was trying to make is I'm trying to encourage people to focus on the things that they don't see on the advertisements, because that's the coercive aspect of psychological propaganda. So they get you to focus on what's there, what you see, and when it comes to the demographics of it, it's not so much white and black, but it's physical attributes and the positions that they're put in. But
and things like beauty and not beauty.
Want to say that.
But Courtney, forgive my interrupting, but we're going to hit a break here shortly.
Sure.
It really seems to me like, yes, I get that in advertising. I used to, teach advertising. I used to own an ad agency. In fact, two of them. And to a large extent, as we're seeing more diversity in advertising, that's because advertisers are reaching out to more diverse audiences. But what you're saying is particularly vital when you consider politics. What the Republicans right now are saying, and have been saying for the last, what Trump has been saying for the last 4 years is, don't look at those billionaires who are picking your pocket. Don't look at those giant corporations who, with their monopolistic behavior, are costing the average American family $5,000 a year that doesn't happen in other countries. Don't look at that. Instead, look at those brown people coming in from Mexico. Look at those black people out in the streets protesting. So Trump is using, and the Republican Party, frankly, Trump just says it more coarsely than most Republicans do, are using that demographic schism, or that racial schism in the United States as a political weapon. Am I making sense, and am I saying the same thing you are?
Yes, and generally, and just to redirect to the politics and with these riots again, I feel like I don't know if you heard this before, but maybe you should run for office, man. You have great mind and a great original perspective. I think you should be running for president sometime.
I'll leave that to you. You should be running for office. Courtney, I'm an old man, and I'm a pretty good writer and a pretty decent talk show host, and I'm going to stick to doing what I know how to do. But politics is wide open, and if you're a young guy, Courtney, I would love to see you running for political office, So keep us up to date. Courtney, good talking to you, Courtney. Thanks a lot. We'll be right back at the top of the hour. On the other side of the hour, we're going to be talking to Professor Richard Wolff. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart-healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by N.B. Turner. It's titled, Is China an Imperialist Country? And it's from a relatively Marxist point of view. I think you'll find it fascinating. This is from the introduction. It has long been known and understood that the entire world has been under the control of capitalist imperialism. For a time, a section of this world broke from it, beginning with the victory of socialism in Russia and continuing through the Chinese Revolution, constituting a socialist world. Yet in time, the socialist countries, through internal class struggles in politics and economics, were seized by capitalist conciliators and advocates, and then by capitalists themselves, who were largely within the ruling communist parties themselves. First in Russia and later in China, when these counter-revolutions and coups took place, there ensued a period of entry and integration into the world imperialist system. The Soviet Union, at first under the existing signboard of socialism, continued much of its established national and economic power relations into a new socialist imperialist bloc, socialist in name, imperialist in reality. The Russian capitalist imperialist attempt to maintain this bloc, or important sections of what had been part of this bloc and its historic allies, has continued in the years since the socialist signboard was discarded. In China, the defeat of the proletariat and the capitalist capture of state power after the death of the great revolutionary Mao Zedong have also led to a period of integration into the world imperialist system. China still operates under a socialist signboard, but has conducted itself unambiguously as a capitalist power. Before the last decade, especially since the demise of the socialist bloc, the U.S. was commonly seen as the sole superpower to which all other powers had to defer. The system which the U.S. had designed at the end of World War II was global in scope, and to some more democratic in appearance than the old colonial empires. But it was built around the elitist privilege of power and authority, meaning the U.S. as superpower was at the centerpiece of the controls. But in the last decade, the imperialist world system is not what it used to be. Throughout the world, corrupt and comprador regimes have faced significant and often unprecedented mass popular opposition movements, which have revealed the deep instability of the old neo-colonialist arrangements. Even in the EU, the product of imperialist designs to supplant the historic internecine battles, there has emerged ever-deepening crises and conflicts and movements to assert nationalist interests against one another. Against the threat of Islamic fundamentalism, the imperialist system was directed by the U.S., has launched wars such as in Iraq and Afghanistan at huge cost, trillions of dollars, and immeasurable losses in political credibility and imperialist authority, as neither war has won any of the U.S.'s objectives. These clear failures at the hand of the largest and most powerful military force in the world do not bode well for maintaining the U.S.'s hegemonic domination of the world's imperialist system. And the economic and financial crises of the last half-decade or more have stirred not only deep discontent, resentment, and popular political opposition within the ranks of the U.S.'s reliable allies, but it has brought to the fore the imperialist anti-U.S. challenges from other major powers, specifically China and Russia. Forces worldwide are studying these changes and considering how they must change the set of options at hand. The all-too prevalent view that U.S. imperialism is so powerful, so dominant, and so capable of manipulating all manner of forces and bending them to its will has been, and continues to be, a dangerous twisting of reality. The sole superpower in this view has been attributed with omnipotent features that defy effective challenge, that reflect a supposedly skillful control of contradictions and crises that afflicted earlier empires, and that has a boundless ability to disguise its malevolent work. If it were true, it would be a remarkable development in human history. Indeed, it would be, as once touted in the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union and bloc by Francis Fukuyama, the end of history. That is, the end of historical conflict and systemic changes. It would be an expression of the boastful and fanciful capitalist post-Mao motto, TINA, there is no alternative to capitalism. There are others who assert that the U.S. is not so omnipotent and that it is in decline and maybe failing, but that the U.S. and its close allies constitute the only imperialism that matters, and that if all its detractors, victims, opponents, and its imperialist rivals band together, liberation will truly be achieved with the demise of U.S. imperialism. This view also holds that whenever big powers like China or Russia rise in opposition to the U.S., they deserve the support and applause from progressive and revolutionary forces. Holding this view are a variety of forces who cling to the notion that the Cold War division of the world is still extant, and that popular protests in recent years from Libya to Syria, Ukraine, and Venezuela, as well as Brazil and Turkey, Iran, even inside Western China, are all examples of U.S. meddling and desperate interference. This view holds that without such U.S. manipulation and interference and disruption, the people would, by and large, be happy or passive. This is, by any measure, an amazing claim, denying the existence of class contradictions and struggles within each of these countries, and making it appear that the conspiratorial powers of the U.S. to manipulate events are unparalleled in reach and effectiveness. In practical political terms, this view distorts the basic reality. Is China an imperialist country? Our book in today's Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye. Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War,
$3,000 a month on a rental toilet because Jared and Ivanka won't let them use their bathroom. I mean, that's how weird it's getting. But anyhow, on the line, speaking of economics, on the line is economist and co-founder of Democracy at Work, Professor Richard Wolff, also the author of numerous books. His latest, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. democracyatwork.info and rdwolff with 2fs.com are his websites. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. And Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program. I'm curious your thoughts on how the gutting of the American middle class, the Rand Corporation put out a study about 2 years ago saying that they thought there about $50 trillion in wealth would have gone to the middle class since the beginning of Reaganomics, or since actually the mid-'70s, had it not been for neoliberal economic policies. And instead, most of that money went to the top, 10%. Most of it went to the top 1%. How does that tie into the people that we saw at the U.S. Capitol, in your mind?
Well, I think the basic story is the following. The system we're living in, capitalism, had its worst collapse and crash in the 1930s. And the interesting thing about that, it lasted from 1929 basically to 1941 when the Second World War got underway. The really interesting thing about that was that the population of the United States, the working class, the massive employees, really went to the left politically, organized themselves into the greatest union organizing drive in American history, the CIO of the 1930s. You had two socialist parties, you had a communist party, all of them worked together, and they basically went to President Roosevelt at the time and they said, not in these words, but they said, you've got to help us through this great depression by creating a secure middle class. They didn't say those words, but I'm going to say it in response to your question. And they got it. They got Social Security when the government came in and set up a retirement program so people over 65 would not be left to the tender or not so tender mercies of their families and friends. The first minimum wage we ever had, the first federal unemployment compensation program we ever had, and the hiring of unemployed people, 15 million of them, to do government jobs, get a salary, keep their homes, and all the rest. And that program, called the New Deal, lasted in its effects not just in the Depression of the 30s, but it basically continued after the war up until the 1960s into the 1970s. And it created the middle class. It gave wages a big boost. It gave the security of knowing your folks, when they got old, would be taken care of and wouldn't be a drain on your younger family's expenses, and so on. And it taught Americans a lesson that they kind of took to heart. Namely, that if you live in America and you work hard, the usual story, you'll get the American dream, you'll be secure, you will have a middle class or something like that standard of living. And then when the Reagan people came in, you had the reaction against it. Because the way it was paid for, and this is so important for people to understand, the way the unemployment compensation and the Social Security and the government jobs were paid for was by taxing corporations and the rich much more than they had ever been taxed before. You were taxing the rich to help average people, and that's why we got a middle class. And the rich people, which should surprise nobody, weren't happy about this, and the corporations neither. And so they got to work, and they got a champion, Ronald Reagan, a Class B actor, to come in there and talk all about renewal and all the fancy language, but the agenda was simple. Undo the New Deal. Undo it all. Use inflation to make the minimum wage mean nothing. Stop all government employment. In fact, go backwards and lay off people in the government, shrink the government. All of that kind of talk was undertaken, and you succeeded. You undid the middle class. But, and here's the punchline, having given people the sense that they could have it, it was a trauma over the last 30 to 40 years to take it away. That's why people are so angry. That's why people are so bitter, because you led them to expect what you then took away from them. And if something isn't done to deal with that basic reality, what we saw on January 6th will be repeated.
Yeah. You know, there's an old saying in NLP and psychology, I can never know if you really love me, but just keep bringing the flowers. In other words, we can never know what's in another person's heart, but we can certainly observe their behavior. There might have been a lot of, white racism. There was, in fact, obviously, running around, among white people back when in Lansing, Michigan, where I grew up, when it was a really growing, booming factory town in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Right. There was no doubt a lot of racism there, but it wasn't being expressed as violently or as openly as it is now because people were busy, they were working, and it just seems like. Well, what's your prescription? What do we do? How do we reverse this?
Well, the first thing you've got to do is recognize the importance of what you just said. And I don't mean to flatter you, but it's extremely important not to get lost with the details. Absolutely, there's racism. Absolutely, there was white supremacy. That is part of Trump's base. He's cultivated it, and it was on display last Wednesday, on the 6th of January. But it doesn't explain why there were so many other people, many of whom aren't white racists, are there for all kinds of different reasons. You know, the Republican Party is a coalition. So is the Democratic Party. Everybody who voted for Biden isn't enthusiastic about Biden. Many of them were enthusiastic about Bernie or about other things, but they made a decision for complicated reasons to do something. And that's true of what happened in January 6th. My response is, take care of the fundamental problem. Give everybody a job. White people will not scapegoat black people anywhere near the way is happening now if they have a decent job. Both the white people and the black people with a secure income, able to take care of their families, able to give their children a college education without going into absurd debt. Those are the clear ways you change the conditions that produced January 6th. Otherwise, you're going to arrest a bunch of people who certainly deserve it. For the people you're upsetting, they'll become martyrs. You will not have changed the conditions, and therefore you really don't have the right to be surprised if you get similar outcomes from conditions you haven't changed.
In fact, it might even harden their resolve.
Absolutely, because the bitterness has been building for decades. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. If you add to the economic destruction of these people in this country, white and black, if you add what is now being layered on top of it, namely the COVID disaster and the failure again of this society to protect people against it, to be prepared for it, even to roll out the vaccines to help control it, you are layering more and more pressure, and people are going to blow. Those with the most mental trouble already will blow first, but the others are building up ahead of steam. This is an issue that has been kicked down the road for a long time, as has our racial problem, and it's blowing up on us.
Yeah, and it's time to deal with it head on. Professor Richard Wolff, brilliant as always, sir. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tom.
And check out Professor Wolff's latest book, The System is the Sickness, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a minute.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Oh, let's see here. Who's been on hold the longest? My apologies for that. Dave in Armstrong Creek, Wisconsin. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. A friend of mine and I were talking about the situation in Washington, and we both agreed that the one thing that really needs to be done is we need to make the people accountable for what happened, starting at the top, and with Donald Trump, of course, and in working through the politicians that were, orchestrating this. And we need to, I hate to say make examples out of some of the people that led this, but they have to understand that there will be consequences for basically, the penalty for treason is execution if they want to do it that way. And I don't agree with capital punishment at all, but we have to be able to show to people that what they're doing, I think there's a lot of people that were involved, with that mob mentality, and they do have issues. But we can't let this, we've got to nip this in the bud. We cannot carry this out. We have to identify, charge, and prosecute these people as soon as possible. Otherwise, if we let this go, and I know the argument is it's just going to divide people more. I don't know how much more divided this country can get. And
the Republicans are being completely disingenuous when they say that, Dave. You know, I mean, this happens every 4 years. When the Republicans have power, they're like, screw you guys, right? Remember 2016? Screw your feelings, only they used the F word. It was like it was a bumper sticker, right? I mean, you know, it's like when Republicans get power, it's like, hey, we're in charge. And when Republicans lose power, then they start talking about, you know, we need national unity. We really need compromise. It's important that Americans come together. We need a seat at the table.
Such a joke when they're talking like that. I can't believe that they would say all of a sudden now.
And it's insane that the media just plays it as if it's perfectly rational and reasonable without putting it in context. The fact that these very same Republicans said, like Mitch McConnell, you know, who's now calling for unity, right? What did he say to Barack Obama, to President Obama, when he nominated Merrick Garland for the U.S. Supreme Court? He said, you know, take a hike, Obama. He told him to go screw himself, essentially. You know, we're not going to do anything with you. We're not going to do anything for you. We're not even going to follow the damn Constitution. We're just going to ignore you.
Opposite. He did the complete opposite with the last judge that they appointed.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's the hypocrisy of these guys is absolutely breathtaking. And, but even more distressing to me is the fact that the media reports on it, by and large, without any historic context, without any understanding of how it got this way, without any kind of framing that helps people understand how disingenuous and you know, full of beans these guys are. I mean, it's just, it's amazing. Yeah. Dave, thank you very much for the call. Thanks for watching us there on Free Speech TV in Armstrong, Wisconsin. I do appreciate it. Good talking to you. Thank you. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day in your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. In our special video for supporters of our program, people who sign up over at ThomHartmann.com, this week it's the story of what the rich libertarian billionaires who have been funding the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party for, well, in a big way since the election of Ronald Reagan for the last 40 years, and have succeeded by owning politicians and owning the Republican Party in preventing us from even getting a public option, much less a national health care system. What they are doing, what their answer is, what their response is to the question, what do we do when things really go bad? When the economy's falling apart, when epidemic disease is sweeping the country, what do we do? Well, it turns out they've got an answer. It's just not an answer for all the rest of us. They're getting in their private jets and heading off to their private little bunkers. Seriously, that's what they're up to. So I lay out the whole story, complete with details and names, over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Thanks so much. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's still this question. We're going to get into this in more detail with Greg Palast in the next hour about the possibility that of basically two things. It's kind of a 1-2 and maybe even a 1-2-3. That number one, the assault, the siege of the U.S. Capitol building was not the result of Donald Trump simply saying, we've got to fight like hell and we got to be strong or we'll lose our country, quack, quack, quack. It wasn't because of the speeches that were given at Ginny Thomas's group's, rally there as the votes were being counted on January 6th. That it wasn't because of that the actual siege of the Capitol building was because a bunch of people had planned it. Just like they planned to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. Just like they planned the siege of the Michigan State Capitol. and other capitals. I mean, it happened here in Oregon, too. Numerous capitals have been under siege. And these are not accidents. These don't just spontaneously happen. So number one, the possibility that there was a planned, coordinated assault, a conspiracy, if you will, to seize the U.S. Capitol. Number two, that there may have been either elected Republican officials who work in the Capitol building every day and thus know its layout, who helped and assisted this plan, and 6 Republicans have now been identified as giving tours the day before, on January 5th, giving tours to these traitors who were coming in to invade the Capitol. Now, the question is whether these Republicans knew this was coming or not. How could you not know? Where's Jim Clyburn's secret office? Well, why would somebody ask that? I mean, wouldn't that set off an alarm? Hey, take me to Nancy Pelosi's office. I'd like to see where the Speaker's office is. At what point do you not say, if you're a Republican congressperson who's giving a tour to people from the Michigan militia, hey, wait a minute, why are you asking that? But apparently they didn't. And then number 3, and I said, this is kind of a 3-step process. What role did Donald Trump himself or the people around him, which is frankly more likely, people like Roger Stone? I doubt Paul Manafort is still, churning the waters, but Roger Stone and some of the old Trump gang, to what extent were they collaborating with these armed groups, these so-called militias, in an attempt to, and let's be very clear about this, an attempt to stop the electoral vote count. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to get to those ballot boxes, which 4 young women spirited out of the Capitol building. God bless them. They wanted to stop the vote count, and they wanted to force Mike Pence to declare Donald Trump the president, or hang Mike Pence. They set up a gallows and they were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and kidnap or kill Nancy Pelosi, which then puts, if I'm remembering my order of succession correctly, I'm pretty sure that the next one in line would be the president pro tem of the Senate, which is a Republican. I think it's Chuck Grassley. I might be wrong on that. Assuming then that Republican would say, okay, we're just going to give the vote to the House of Representatives. We'll let each state vote however they want to vote, knowing that the majority of the states are Republican controlled. And if the vote went to the House, Donald Trump gets elected. I mean, we know this was their theory. We know that Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani have openly talked about this to the media. They've given speeches about this. Donald Trump has talked about this. This was an attempt to overturn an election in the United States by force. That has not happened since the Civil War. And there are 197 Republican members of the U.S. House of Representatives who yesterday voted to say, that's just fine with us. What the hell is going through these people's minds? I get it. They've got to preserve the lie of voter fraud so they can continue to suppress the vote of black people and old people and students back home in their states. I get it. They can't say, we've been lying to you for 40 years. Yeah, George Bush spent $74 million in 2.5 years and all 100 U.S. attorneys looking for voter fraud, and out of 1 billion votes, he found 31 cases of it. So it's meaningless. But we can't acknowledge that, because then we'd have to do away with these stupid laws that make it harder and harder for people to vote. So who was involved in this conspiracy? Inquiring minds want to know. I'll pick up your calls after the break. As I mentioned earlier, if you've called into the program before, I'll be able to take your call. You'll just be put on hold and just hang out until I put you on the air. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where smart people get their news, and let's discuss that news right after this break.
Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. "America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles." Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from his marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrast. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in some, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. "This American carnage stops right here and stops right now," said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. That was some weird S-word, former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. Cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence.
The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. So we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are signed up, for supporters of our program. And it's about how Donald Trump, 16 days after Mr. Khashoggi was murdered by the Saudis in Turkey and his body dismembered and vanished, 16 days after that happened, without notifying Congress and with virtually no mention to anybody, Donald Trump authorized the transfer of top secret nuclear technology to the Saudis. This should be a serious issue. Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, is raising hell about it because Khashoggi lived in Virginia. But I think everybody in Congress should be raising hell about this. And when you back this up with this new report out from ProPublica that the Saudis were involved in 9/11, it gets real interesting. So you can check that out over at thomhartmann.com. You know, look for our basically members only video. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and David in Torrance, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hello, Tom. I was watching MSNBC last night. I think I heard some of the smartest comments from Thom Hartmann. And I recommend, actually, if you can bring him as a guest, about the Republican Party, and basically was saying that the Republican Party is going through turmoil, and during it may get fractured, and if Democrats act intelligently, they can they have a chance to expand their voter.
I'm with you, David. And I agree. I mean, if you look at the Republican Party throughout the 1950s, anyway. And in fact, I'd say right up until 1965, that was my dad's Republican Party. I'm very familiar with it. That Republican Party was really basically all about small business. Well, they were in the pocket of big business, obviously, but they were big fans of small businesses and local business, and supportive of both Social Security and unions. In fact, Dwight Eisenhower, you take a look at his ad campaigns for his 1956 re-election bid for president. He campaigned on the fact that he had expanded union membership by over 1 million people, and he had expanded Social Security to cover more than 2 million new Americans, or additional Americans, and that he had raised Social Security benefits substantially. That was the Republican Party from basically the New Deal until the Civil Rights Act. And then with the Civil Rights Act in 64 and 65, what we saw, and 66 with the voting rights and civil rights and then Medicare and everything else, all this stuff coming together, the Republican Party became the party of, using Nixon's Southern strategy, they became the party of racism, and they, as well as the party of big business. But they kind of stopped paying attention to small business and local businesses during that period of time. Because, again, it was a small constituency. It was a small number of people who supported them. And now they've just completely thrown in with the billionaire class and big business, even international big business, to the detriment of average working Americans and even small and medium-sized businesses in the United States. It's insane. And so, I'm glad to hear that Thom Friedman is finally waking up. His book, The Olive Tree and the Lexus, did so much damage to this country. I mean, promoting neoliberal trade policies. It was terrible. Anyhow, thanks a lot for the call. Ronnie in New Berlin, Wisconsin. Hey, Ronnie, what's on your mind today?
Sure. The other day when you brought up the topic of if we had been told by our Democratic leaders and Hillary and the media that the election had been stolen, we would be out in the streets in D.C. also. And I tend to believe that, except I would draw the line at the point that we are smart enough, on our side at least, to actually look at facts. And when we would see case after case after case where there's no evidence and that the judges are throwing them out, and especially if they were our own judges, if Elena Kagan was throwing things out, it's like there's just a separation between people who look at facts and accept them and people who look at facts and say fake news. So, yeah.
But here's the thing, Ronnie. Have you spent any time at all in the last couple of weeks watching Fox News?
Oh, hell no. I cannot torture myself like that.
Well, let me recommend it. I realize how bizarre that sounds. But particularly their primetime programming. They're programming between 6 and 9 p.m. Eastern time, or 6 and 10 p.m. And what you'll find is that they don't talk about the fact that Republican judges threw out these cases. And if that does leak into the conversation, they kind of snark it as if that Republican judge had somehow been bought off or really was just a rhino, a Republican in name only, that kind of thing. So it's just, I get what you're saying. I completely get what you're saying. And I think that, most of America still relies on or assumes that the Associated Press and the Washington Post and the New York Times and their local newspapers are telling the truth when they say that, Joe Biden actually won the election, for example. But if you're getting most of your information off right-wing media, whether it's right-wing talk radio or whether it's Fox News or OAN or Newsmax, you're not going to know the whole story.
Right. And I get that. But don't you think that our side, if this had been completely mirror flipped, don't you think that our side would actually have listened to the facts?
Oh, I think the majority of our side would have, Ronnie. But see, it wasn't 70 million people who marched on Washington, D.C. and broke into the Capitol, the people who voted for Donald Trump. It was what, 10,000 people at the most? Probably 4,000 or 5,000. And I think that if it was a mirror image, there's probably 4,000 or 5,000 people on our side who would snap too. As Richard Wolff pointed out, the people who are mentally ill will go first. And there's,
that's true.
That's like one in 10 Americans.
Yeah. All right. I just wanted to throw that out.
I'm not calling for compassion, for the people who committed crimes at the Capitol building. But I do think that if we don't all understand how this happens, it's going to happen again. And that's what flips me out so badly about people like you've got Mikey Sherrill is the Democrat who pointed out that Republicans were running reconnaissance operations. And it looks like Andy Biggs, these are Republican members of the House, Andy Biggs, Mo Brooks, Paul Gosar were among them. And there's a few others that were also, giving tours of the Capitol to people who wanted to invade the Capitol. I mean, this is just mind-boggling. Ronnie, I got to run, but thank you.
Can I throw one thing out?
Real quick.
Kyle Rittenhouse, the guy that shot and killed the two protesters in Racine, he got his bail. He was photographed in a bar in southern Wisconsin. One, he's not even old enough to drink. He's in there. He's photographed drinking a beer. He's with a bunch of white nationalists, and they're posing with their white nationalist symbols in their, doing the finger symbol. So now the judge has asked for restrictions on his probation, where he cannot drink alcohol and he cannot do symbols and he cannot affiliate with white nationalists. I mean, the balls of these people is just... Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's this cult that has now gained considerable power in the Republican Party, unfortunately. Ronnie, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Zach in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Morning, Tom. I'd like to just explain, give a simple, my view on January 6th. Okay. It's the result of a 40-year campaign that shows the simplicity and power of three buzzwords. And here it is. The left, liberals, and Hillary Clinton, that's the three, and they're coming to take your country away, your jobs away. They're going to take your guns away, your babies away, your freedom away, your hamburgers away, your white privilege away, and they're going to give it to brown people.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And somehow they completely miss the fact that, expanding the breadth, the width of the American middle class to include people of all colors, of all races, does not hurt white people. It actually helps everybody because it builds a stronger and more vibrant economy. But they're going to hang on to this until
when they figured out how much money they could, make on the OJ trial, Comcast 98, they made politics into sports. They gave free rein for radio hosts to put labels on fellow Americans and alienating them against each other. And it all happened with three buzzwords: Hillary Clinton, the left, and liberals. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I would track it back even farther than that, Zach. I would say that it started, with Richard Nixon talking about the silent majority, which was basically white people, and then going to Ronald Reagan. Remember the comment Reagan made? Maybe you're not old enough, but Reagan made this comment about, how do you feel when you're standing in line in a supermarket and a young buck is in front of you? His phrase for a young black man. A young buck is in front of you, and he's paying with food stamps for his steak and his beer. I mean, that was Reagan. That was putting this stuff on steroids, racism on steroids, and the Republican Party's been totally there ever since. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past 3.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And just a reminder for today, Joyce injured herself. And so I can take your calls if you've called into the program before. Our database has you. If you haven't, I can't take your call. I'm sorry. And welcome back. Let's see here. Martha in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Martha, what's on your mind today?
Are you talking about Martina?
Or Martina, excuse me, Martina.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am well. What's up?
Several things. One is Wisconsin, of course, had a very nice rebellion back in 2011. We got rid of Governor Walker. It took 7 years. But part of what happened to help it along was the Solidarity Sing-Along. 2,500 times people gathered at the Capitol to sing songs of rebellion, workers' rights, civil rights, and hope.
That's remarkable.
We still gather.
I didn't know that.
Well, I'm telling you now, we still gather, not at the Capitol because of COVID, but on Zoom, on Tuesdays and Fridays. And if you want, I will let you know how to tap into that maybe. But I'm inviting anybody who
I wouldn't be able to.
Tomorrow.
I wouldn't be able to participate, Martina, but it's great to know that it's there. I mean, that's
Let me tell you, though, tomorrow we're going to do it live at the Capitol again from the pedestal where they took down the bronze statue of our lady forward. We will have a live musician with a guitar leading the singing from 12 to 1 tomorrow. And I will have a Zoom page up for people to join us.
Okay, and if you're listening in Madison, Wisconsin, be there or be square.
Right.
What's the weather forecast for
State
tomorrow,
Street.
Martina, in Madison?
Right. And, oh, geez, my mind just went blank. My proposal is that if they don't get rid of Trump and Pence and McConnell and Ron Johnson, that we declare a general strike and start educating ourselves about what a general strike is really all about. And, you know, you worry about Cruz and Tom Cotton and that. You ought to be worrying about Paul Ryan and Scott Walker. These are snakes in the grass, man.
Yeah, but they're now just lobbyists, right? Haven't they set themselves up in corporate America with giant paychecks? I'm sorry, say that again. They're going forward from here. It makes no difference what they are now. They're learning the tricks of the trade so they'll do it better next time and not get caught. Oh, yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree.
Trump was the buffoon. These guys are smart. They're smarter than snakes. Anyhow, one more thing. The man's name is Raffensperger. R-A-S-S, Raffensperger. Okay? Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. Thank you, Martina. Yeah, I like to pronounce it as Raffensperger because he oversaw the purge of lots of black voters from the voting rolls in Georgia. Yeah, you know, an extensive purge of the voting rolls in Georgia. But, you know, I get it that I may be mispronouncing it. I got that pronunciation from Greg Palast, who really laid this stuff out. And it's just amazing to me, again, the media not putting things in context. Raffensperger took on took on Donald Trump and said, you know, no, the election was fair and we, you know, and Joe Biden actually won. And the media treats him like he's some sort of voting rights hero, when in fact he's been one of the main guys running voting purges, you know, running voter suppression in the state of Georgia for years. Anyhow, we'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. If you're calling in and I don't have you in my database, I can't answer the phone. So, you know, just give up. We'll be back. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. So we just put up a new member-only video talking about Donald Trump being a racist and how we're all dancing around there, or at least the media. By we, I'm talking about the media that I'm a part of, I suppose. The media broadly is and for that matter in Congress. I mean, you know, with this House resolution to condemn Trump's racist tweets, they couldn't condemn Trump as a racist. That would have been a violation of House rules. But his tweets, we'll condemn them, right? This is the same guy who said, and I quote, laziness is a trait in blacks, end quote. He said, quote, immigrants from Haiti all have AIDS, end quote. He said, if Nigerian immigrants came here, they would, quote, never go back to their huts, end quote. You know, he referred to S-hole countries. He lied about Obama repeatedly. I mean, anyhow, let's just call out his racism. All the examples are in the video, and I think you'll find it fascinating. It's available over at thomhartmann.com, so check it out. Thank you. Welcome back. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Back at you, Michael.
Oh, many thanks. You know, in regards to this impeachment, when you look back what happened last Wednesday at the Capitol siege, you got to admit that every single Congress member, Democrat and Republican, their lives, their safety were in grave danger. I stress the word grave. All those Republicans that have been covering for Trump and backing him up for all this time, I thought many, if not all, would have woken up, turned over a new leaf, and realized that they were nearly killed by his rhetoric. And to my surprise, if I could put that in quotes, when you listen to the likes of Kevin McCarthy, Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz, who I all call the clown princes of BS, they still backing him up. And then I hear what you're saying and what some other people are saying about a possible inside job, and then rung a light bulb in my head as to why they don't want this impeachment, because I'm seeing somewhat of a replay here that an impeachment investigation, impeachment hearing, and even trial for that matter, could open up evidence as to who the hell else was involved. If you look back at the first impeachment hearing, you remember how Democrat Eric Swalwell, I hope I said his last name correctly, exposed the GOP ranking member Devin Nunes into that Ukraine scandal. So do you see this being a repeat here with other Republicans?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to know how deep this rot goes, how extensive this conspiracy is, because it's increasingly looking like this was not. I mean, the kind of official story is that Ginny Thomas and that this Women for Liberty or whatever the group is named was going to have, they have the permit for the rally. And they were going to have a little rally there, and that was it, at the time that the votes are being counted. And then Trump shows up and says, hey, let's go to the Capitol, right? This is the official story. Trump shows up and says, hey, let's go to the Capitol. And these people are all blindsided. Oh, my God, we had no idea. We don't have a permit to go to the Capitol. We have assured the Capitol Police that nobody's going to go to the Capitol. How can he say this? Oh, my God. Well, it may well be that that's true. But I'm convinced now, given the preliminary evidence that has come out, Michael, I am convinced that in that crowd there was at least a few hundred and perhaps a few thousand people who were going to go to the Capitol no matter what. And they were going to go there, with body armor and zip ties and camouflage and baseball bats and lead pipes to seize the Capitol, to hang a Mike Pence, which is what they said they wanted to do, to kidnap and probably kill Nancy Pelosi, so that the third in line in the presidential order of secession, which is the president pro tem of the Senate, which would have been a Republican senator, and again, I'm not sure who that is. Maybe somebody can tell me on Twitter. I think
you were correct. I think you were correct when
I think it's Chuck Grassley.
I think you were correct. And I would.
So he would be then the person who would be in charge. And they're thinking, hey, he's a Republican. He'll declare Donald Trump president. And that was their plan. Their plan was literally to overthrow a presidential election, to overturn a presidential election in which Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by 7 million votes. And that's insane.
And then when you look at the fact that you have some Republicans that state that you got to hold Trump accountable. Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, said it, and you got a couple of other Republicans that have broke ranks. That should have been a cue, like, all right, enough is enough. And then when you have the other Republicans, like the ones I have mentioned, I'm more convinced now that this is something far more sinister than what we currently know or imagine.
I think what we're going to find is that among elected Republicans in the House of Representatives, and I don't know if this extends to the Senate beyond, the usual suspects like Ron Johnson, but among Republicans in the House of Representatives, there is a bifurcation. There are those who were in on the plan to keep Donald Trump as president, regardless of the outcome of the election, or believed in the plan to keep Donald Trump as president, regardless of the outcome of the election, and those who were not in on the plan. And it looks to me like Liz Cheney was not in on the plan. The Republican from Illinois, who's being quoted a lot. I'm sorry, his name isn't right at the tip of my tongue. Starts with an R, as I recall, but he was not in on the plan.
There are a good number of them.
The guy from Michigan who replaced Justin Amash, he was not in on the plan. He voted to impeach Trump. These 10 people. So we know for sure, or I think reasonably can assume, that there are 10 Republicans in the U.S. House who were not in on the plan or were not down with the plan. We're not willing to let it happen. It's just like, the Nazis could never have killed 6 million Jews if the majority of the German people didn't just turn and look the other way, even though they knew what was going on. And it's that same thing in the U.S. House of Representatives among the Republicans. You've got the ones who were participating in the plot, and you've got the ones who were turning and looking away. But they knew that the plot was going on. And then you've got this small group, apparently 10 of them, who chose not, who were never invited in, or just thought it was a crazy idea, period. Michael, thank you for the call. Always good to hear from you. We'll be back. We're gonna dig into some really interesting territory here in just a few minutes. Greg Palast is going to drop by, and we're going to be talking about the latest we know about what I was just talking about, this plot. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart-healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
It's the Thom Hartmann University. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In with our old buddy Greg Palast, the investigative journalist, author of his most recent book, How Trump Stole 2020. GregPalast.com, his website. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast, P-A-L-A-S-T. And Greg, you have been doing some serious digging into what happened on January 6th in Washington, D.C. with your intrepid investigative journalist hat on. Tell me about it.
Okay, some nasty news. Number one, the guy that Trump put in charge of the march is a guy named Ali Alexander. Now he's gotten some publicity because we filmed him, that is Zach D. Roberts, who follows the white supremacists and been following him for years, filmed him in Georgia just before moving on to D.C., that unless they pick Trump, quote, we will light the whole blank, I can't say it on air, on fire.
The S word.
So he's already threatening arson in both Georgia and in Washington. We have him on camera. By the way, he's standing next to your favorite, Alex Jones. That's the guy that the White House put in charge of the march on the Capitol, to lead the march on the Capitol. But here's the new, really ugly and terrifying information in two pieces. One, we found out that he was officially, Ali Alexander, in Georgia. Why was he there? Because he was officially sponsored by the Georgia Republican Party and the National Republican Senate campaign run by Rick Scott to lead the GOP's Get Out the Vote rally. I kid you not. He was their sponsored speaker, the guy, and this is after we reported his threats to burn down the Capitol. They used him to draw and get out the vote.
The GOP was running a get out the vote strategy after the vote had already happened? What am I missing?
This is not after the riot. This is before the riot. We reported on Ali's threats to burn down the Capitol. This is a couple weeks before he went to the Capitol. We have it on tape. Go to gregpalast.com and on film. And after we made our first report on his violent threats, and this is before the Capitol riot, the GOP officially, both the state GOP of Georgia and the National Republican Senate Committee, brought in Ali Alexander, this violent alt-right freak, who, by the way, is cavorting with Nazis, with swastika flags, with the Proud Boys, etc., besides Alex Jones. They brought him in to be the keynote speaker for their rally for Get Out the Vote for the Senate runoff. Then we go to Washington, Tom. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, just a little background. Who is Ali Alexander? Where did he come from? And why, when I watch this video, is it that he doesn't look like a white nationalist to me?
No, in fact, Trump keeps pointing out he's very close to Trump. Trump is a super fan, and Trump always tends to note in their conversations that he's a dead ringer for Sammy Davis Jr. And his name apparently at some point was Ali Akbar, but he was convicted of some felony counts, so he decided it prudent to change his name to Ali Alexander. He's been somewhat co-hosting InfoWars with Alex Jones. We have him on camera if you go to the site where he's yucking it up with a Nazi and his giant swastika flag, and he's, of course, with the Proud Boys as well. But more important, he's a guy who is advocating violence. And this is the guy that Trump put in charge of leading a march from the rally to the Capitol. And what's even more dangerous about that, by the way, Tom, is that it turns out there was no permit for a march. In fact, the people who sponsored the march, they're Trumpites, as is Women for America First. They held the permit for the rally. When they saw that Ali Alexander, this alt-right violent freak, was going to lead a march from their rally to the Capitol, they had promised the Metro Police there absolutely would be no rally. And after Alexander announced it, they informed the Metro Police and they told the White House, we want to remind you there's no monitors, there's no police information. We have promised the Park Service and the police there will be no march to the Capitol. You have to understand, it's a mile and a half. You have to have monitors and porta potties. The police have to set up special barricades. You have to be able to control the crowd. Well, if you set off a crowd without a permit, without monitors, without any notice to the police, which are undermanned, unprepared, and shocked, what do you think is going to happen? So you have to understand the White House was warned.
So this group that was, Women for America First, that was swearing on a stack of Bibles to the Capitol Police that there would be no attack on the Capitol building as a result of their rally. This group
that there would be no march.
Duped? Was infiltrated? Why did Ginny Thomas's group decide to have this rally at the same time that the vote was being counted in the Capitol?
Oh, they wanted to have a rally. They thought, they're supporting their man. We protested against Bush's theft of the election. They want to scream and holler and protest. Well, that's America. What isn't America is that the police were told, don't worry, there will be no march to the Capitol. No march to the Capitol. We have it in writing. They've sworn on it. There are text messages. Plus, importantly, when they saw that Ali Alexander was saying that there was going to be a march from the rally to the Capitol, they told the White House we have the text, there can be no march to the Capitol. And the first time that the Capitol Police, the first time that even the sponsors of the rally, the first time anyone knew that there actually was going to be a march, was when Trump announced it at 12:15 p.m. Now, when you launch a march of thousands and thousands of people with no police information, no permit, no monitors, no nothing, what do you expect to happen? What exactly do you expect to happen? So it was Trump himself who set off on this cavort to send these people out. Well, of course, as I talked to one lawyer, who's a specialist actually at the permitted protest, he said, if you send off people against and violating of permits against the law with no protection, no information, you know that there's going to be mayhem. Well, you're culpable. So when we talk about high crimes and misdemeanors, sending these people off, knowing, having the White House been informed that this would lead to mayhem. They were told in no uncertain terms, you can't do this. And Trump did it anyway.
Trump triggered this thing, Greg. Just to be very, very clear. Donald Trump, you could say Ali Alexander, and, he may or may not be able to get an entire crowd of people to march a mile and a half to a Capitol building. But Donald Trump did.
Right.
And,
Donald Trump
197 members of the U.S. House of Representatives yesterday voted to say that's just fine with us.
Well, they didn't. Well, first of all, this is even more information they didn't have. There's no excuse, obviously, for the 197 members. But it's very important to understand, Ali Alexander can't lead tens of thousands of people on a crazy cavort to the Capitol. He doesn't have that type of reach. It was Donald Trump, his superfan, who picked up his notices that there would be a march, despite the White House being told, Ali Alexander's dangerous. They were told he was dangerous. They knew it. And they also said, you can't do this. It's against the law. There's COVID restrictions. You can't have a march in Washington right now because of COVID. And so they said, it's against the law. It's dangerous. We don't have the monitors. We can't do this. And Trump insisted anyway. So understand, it was Trump, Alexander and Alex Jones were put in charge of this little march by the White House. The important thing is that Donald Trump launched this crazy attack on Congress. Now, he didn't say commit violence, but when you send people off uncontrolled and unmonitored, they're angry, and you know that many are armed. What exactly do you think is going to happen? You are responsible, Mr. President. You are responsible.
Well, and they were trying to seize the ballot box, and if they could have hanged Mike Pence and killed Nancy Pelosi, then the third person in line would have been the Speaker Pro Tem of the Senate, or the President Pro. It goes to the Secretary of State, Pompeo? I thought it went to the President Pro Tem.
You might have me there, Tom. You're the expert.
We'd also be a Republican. Yeah, okay. But in any case, this was an attempt to overturn an election. The great Greg Palast, gregpalast.com. Get over to his website right now and check this out. It's mind-boggling, gregpalast.com. Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we'll be back coming up on 16 minutes past the hour. 15 and a half minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls. And more of the news today. And welcome back. David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Well, a whole lot of stuff, but I know we don't have a lot of time. But what I'd like to highlight here for you, Tom, is the conversation that you and Professor Wolff had concerning the Roosevelt middle class, if you will. And you, to your credit, pointed out that there, even in that middle class reality, predominantly for white folks, black folks wasn't included in that. Well,
correct.
So I think, Tom, what we have here is, and I don't suggest that you minimize what the black experience was at that time, but I think Professor Wolff kind of jumped over that. And so I would submit to you, Tom, like what's hatching out and what's being revealed in this space and time is that the South won the war. They assassinated Lincoln, pulled the troops out of the South, and instilled what you call Jim Crow by any other name, slavery, right? And from that point up till right now, where Palast is doing his thing on voter suppression and all of the stuff that we have been experiencing since our setting foot here, along with the original one percenters, the so-called founding fathers, right, who had no confidence in true democracy, right? And they didn't believe in the so-called unwatched masses. And they believed in the elite ruling over us, just like the elite in the South with the slave masters. The regular Joe...
Not entirely, but yes, broadly speaking, yes. But David, the one thing that I would add to your analysis, because I think your analysis from beginning to end is spot on and absolutely correct. The one thing I would add is that in the 1960s, with the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act and et cetera, through that period, unions started bringing black people into the middle class workplace. And by the 70s and even basically the early 80s, I left Michigan in 1978, but there was a growing black middle class throughout the 1970s in Lansing, because there, I knew people whose dads, black people whose dads worked at Fisher Body. Go for it.
May I suggest to you, though, my friend, is that even though
David, first, may I just finish this thought real quick, because we're just about we have only 1 minute left. And my point was that growing black middle class that came out of that civil rights era in the 60s, number one, came to largely a stop in the 1980s. But number two, that was what triggered the white rage that brought Reagan to power, and that we're seeing as a direct line from there right to here. Back to you, David.
Well, even with that so-called period that you would attribute to our economic advancement during the 60s, I would submit to you, though, too, Tom, here again, what we do is minimize what our experience was in the 60s. I was a child who was raised up during the 50s and 60s and experienced, right, at that period of so-called black progress, white suppression, right? White oppression. We had to watch riots during that period of time. And that was for a reason. You see?
Right, and into the early 70s, too. Yes, David, you're absolutely right. And I got to run. I'm sorry, because the machine has turned the music on. David, thank you for the call, for a good, thoughtful conversation. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. You know, there's been a debate going on for 40 years about whether Reagan's, what George Herbert Walker Bush during the primaries in 1980 called voodoo economics, trickle-down economics, Reaganomics, whether it works or not. Does it work to stimulate the economy and help the lot of the average working person to cut taxes on rich people, like Donald Trump did, in 2017. $1.5 trillion tax cut for the rich. Does that help the economy? Well, the London School of Economics, the most prestigious economics institution in the world, just did the most comprehensive study on this, including 20 OECD nations, 20 of the richest nations in the world, including the United States and the United Kingdom, which is where this insanity began back in the early 1980s with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And the results are shocking. We lay the whole thing out in a new video that's over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Leslie in Springfield, Missouri. Hey, Leslie, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Just wanted to thank you for helping me stay sane over these months. I wanted to touch on 2 points. We have the word evidence thrown around a lot, and then there's the word proof. Do you think there's a distinction between the two? Because I do, and with social media, we've got a lot of proof of a lot of bad actors out there, including members of Congress. And my question to that effect would be, what do you think the likelihood is of expulsions?
I think it's very likely, actually, at least for a few people. And to your point about the difference between evidence and proof, which is a really good one, Leslie, I always thought that proof was evidence that has been vetted. Wouldn't that be I mean, I haven't looked it up in the dictionary or anything, but it just makes sense that proof would be evidence that has been, vetted or demonstrated to be accurate to the, and not just accurate, but consequential, to a way that would satisfy a judge or jury or people. Yeah, I think that one of two things happened with Gosar and Mo Brooks and, let's see, where'd all the names go? Andy Biggs, Paul Gosar. One of two things happened with these members of Congress who were apparently giving representatives of a white nationalist movement that was going to storm the Capitol the next day, that was apparently giving them tours of the White House so that they could case the place. Either they did it ignorantly, in which case they are amazingly, blindingly stupid people, or they knew what was going on, in which case they are accessories to 5 murders.
That's complicit. That's being complicit.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Lauren Boebert,
is
a blaring example with a photo of herself with several individuals, a few who've already been collared and been charged.
You're right.
So,
yeah, and
my father
then,
taught me the difference. So.
Yeah, and in the middle of the insurrection, she was tweeting 1776 and the location of Nancy Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi.
I mean, this is Republican from Q, right? And
she only has her GED.
Leslie,
wow.
Say that again.
She apparently
she didn't graduate from high school?
GED last year. Yeah, she has her GED, but she only earned it last year, from what I've been reading. I think there should be a minimum of a level of education to be even allowed to run for representative or Senate, and a psychological battery. I've, applied for jobs where I'm forced to take a psychological battery for a $12 an hour job. Okay, we need level heads in Congress.
This comes up a lot on this show, Leslie, and I'll just give you my kind of boilerplate response. When we start placing restrictions beyond citizenship on who can run for public office, we are giving power to the current establishment, to the current administration, to prevent people from running for political office. If a certain educational requirement was necessary or a certain level of sanity, who administers the sanity test? And if Donald Trump's administration is administering that sanity test, would I then be allowed to run for Congress? I doubt it. So I think that's a very dangerous road to go down. What we need to do is realize that, in my opinion, that elections are that sanity test. Elections are where people determine whether somebody's education is appropriate to the job, or their temperament, or anything else. And the problem
if you don't have a clear understanding of the Constitution.
Well, I get that. But my point is that our elections have been corrupted, not in the way Donald Trump is talking about. They've been corrupted by the Supreme Court decisions in 76 and 78, Buckley and Bellotti, and 2010, Citizens United, that allowed billionaires and big corporations to come into the electoral space and run just blanket, wall-to-wall, carpet bomb voters with ads promoting their candidates, the candidates that they've bought and paid off, or trashing and destroying the candidates that they think are going to raise their taxes. And as a result of that, the average voter isn't able to make that kind of rational decision about who they want representing them in an environment, in an open environment of actual facts. Does that make sense, Leslie?
No, very much so. And yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword. I want competent, intelligent people with our country on their hands, but I don't blame Lauren's brevity for running for office. I just can't believe she got in, but that just tells you it seems like an infiltration of QAnon and conspiracy theorists, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is another example, and I just read that she wants to file articles of impeachment against Joe Biden on day one.
Right. It would be interesting to look into who actually funded those two campaigns. And I'm not talking about the official campaign donations that show up at opensecrets.org. I'm talking about who were the black money groups that were buying millions of dollars worth of advertising in those congressional districts.
Right. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Leslie. I would love to know the answer to that question. Coming up on our break here at the bottom of the hour, we'll be back. We're going to get into a little bit of science stuff. This is fascinating. Then I'll be back to your calls. Latricea Adams is going to be with us.
The Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I shouldn't say science because it's about the Flint water crisis, and the indictment has now happened of the former Republican governor of Michigan. Stick around. Latricea Adams is going to be with us.
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
The hidden history of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. Hey, we have a new video for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. It's about curing type 1 diabetes, which is a pretty amazing thing. Type 1 diabetes is where the cells in the pancreas that produce
$961 a year in your pocket. That's
They're
how much.
gone. Type 1 diabetics, typically it shows up in childhood. And without insulin, people die from it fairly young. With insulin, they can live a good long life. But a University of Alberta researcher, Dr. James Shapiro, back in 1990, pioneered a transplant system. Now, the problem with that was that people had to use immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of their lives because they had just gotten, a partial pancreas transplant from another person. But now he's successfully on mice worked out a way of actually curing type 1 diabetes. We can't do it legally here in the United States, but they're doing it in Canada. It's amazing. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Latricea Adams, the founder, CEO, and president of Black Millennials for Flint. Black Millennials 4Flint.org is the URL, the website. And the Trifecta 7 or BM 4 Flint are the Twitter handles. Latricea, welcome to the program. Bring us up to date on what happened with this indictment of Rick Snyder, the former Republican governor of Michigan.
Yes, I'm happy to share, but not happy about these results with these charges. First, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a few years now, but we're still forging ahead seeking justice. So I want to just start with the charges being actual misdemeanors. That was released very, very late last night, maybe a little close to midnight. For someone to literally make a decision that, has and will continue to impact a whole city of people for generations to come, a misdemeanor is just such a slap in the face. And the slap in the face is to quote the former mayor, Karen Weaver, who worked diligently for years during her tenure to seek justice with the crisis. it is very performative, meaning that I would be remiss not to say that since the settlement is also at its peak, that these charges are kind of adjacent just to say, okay, we have to do something. But this something is definitely not enough. These consequences are not adequate in regards to the damage that has been done.
Yeah, let's. I'm totally with you. To charge somebody who destroyed the lives of, who influenced the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, probably destroyed the lives of tens of thousands of people, and actually whose actions led to the death of a number of people. There was also a Legionnaires' outbreak as a consequence of this that killed a few people. To charge them with a misdemeanor on par with jaywalking seems to me obscene as well. I'm totally with you. Latricea, let's, for people who may not be familiar with the situation, lay out the story. This started when a group of Republican lawmakers and the Republican governor decided that they were over it with largely black-run cities, Detroit, Flint, Benton Harbor, and I grew up in Michigan. And they passed a law to let them put their little emperors in charge, to blow away the city council, to blow away the mayor's office, and put a so-called emergency manager in who was just a corporate toady. And then those emergency managers proceeded to try to strip these cities of their assets and sell them off. The whole Belle Isle and Detroit thing and everything else. And that it's in the middle of that milieu that the decision was made by the little emperor, by the city manager in Flint, to change their water supply because it would save them some money that presumably they could use to lower the taxes of, like, the DeVos family in Michigan. Do I have that right, first of all?
You have that absolutely right. And to be even more specific, it would save $100 a day. So literally, destroying the lives of a majority black city, this is just genocide. For $100 a day was the specific number that they were trying to save based on the backs and lives of people in Flint. So I love the word that you use, it's obscene.
Yeah. Well, I think it is. It's by any definition. If you have the name on the tip of your tongue, who was this emergency manager that Rick Snyder put into place? What kind of qualifications did he have, and what has happened to him?
So the emergency manager, actually, there were some charges that were dropped a little bit earlier on in the Flint water crisis, which is unusual that now that the charges are being brought up against Snyder and the health director, that it's not inclusive of the emergency manager. I think that is on purpose because there is reluctance to actually abolish this process with even placing an emergency manager in, like you mentioned earlier, it just so happens to be, quote unquote, placed in black cities. I think that there are several other culprits that have not been held accountable and brought to the table, and that emergency manager is definitely one of them. I know that it sounds pretty crass, but it definitely is a perfect analogy. When I think about the role of an emergency manager, especially as we think about a majority black city, it's no different than slavery, where you had an overseer, to look out and tell, a master, what has gone wrong in the field. It's completely disgusting, and it takes us back centuries. And then considering the social climate in this country right now, it makes matters even worse.
So, Latricea, we're talking with Latricea Adams, the founder, CEO, and president of Black Millennials for Flint, the website blackmillennials4flint.org. And the Twitter handle BM4Flint or the Trifecta 7. Latricea, it seems to me that charging the former governor with a jaywalking level misdemeanor but getting the headline, former Republican governor indicted, suffers criminal indictment, because, it is a crime to jaywalk too. That doing that is actually, while it seems like accountability, it's being sold as accountability, it seems to me like this is actually a cover-up. This is, we're going to throw people this bone, and Rick Snyder is going to do his contrition routine on TV and apologize, and then he'll be able to go on with his life, taking, with his new job as a lobbyist or whatever he's doing these days, for no doubt, in bed with a bunch of billionaire corporations and whatnot. Am I being paranoid here? Am I exaggerating this?
I do not believe that you are exaggerating at all. I think that you are spot on. Like I mentioned earlier, I definitely believe that this is performative. I think that it's
like performance art.
Say that again.
It's like performance art. This is just a dance they're doing to cover it up. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then another thing that I want to mention is the fact that when he was still in office during his tenure while he was on trial, that money for attorney fees and legal fees were paid by Michigan, tax dollars. So when we talk about justice and consequences, he needs to reimburse the entire state of Michigan for all of those legal fees, and
so the taxpayers of Flint were paying for Rick Snyder's legal bills?
Yeah, so when he was on trial, while he still was the governor of Michigan, taxpayer dollars went to pay for those fees. And see, those are the things that are not being amplified. It's a disaster in more ways than one.
Now, I understand that since Governor Gretchen Whitmer has come in, a Democrat who's running the state now anyway, that most of the lead pipe water lines in Flint have been replaced. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so it's only about 15% or so pipes that still need to be replaced. There is new leadership in the city of Flint, and that was one of his first orders, Mayor Sheldon Neely, when he just got into office at the latter part of 2019. What a ride to go right into COVID-19. But yes, there's just a minimal amount that still remains, but they're looking to have it fully completed before the end of this year, 2021.
That's great. I mean, it's terrible that it happened in the first place. This, by the way, is not this problem is not entirely unique to Flint. This is happening in low-income areas all across the United States, white areas in Appalachia, mostly black areas in cities around the country. But Flint is the poster child for the whole thing. Latricea Adams, thank you so much for dropping by and sharing this information with us. It's great talking with you. Thank you. And keep up the great work. Black Millennials, #4flint.org is the website, and BM4Flint, don't include the word number, but you know what I mean, the #4 Flint is the Twitter handle. We'll be back in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls
right after
the
middle class grew.
And welcome back. Kevin in Cedar Lake, Indiana. Hey, Kevin, thank you for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking the call. One of the things that I've noticed, a sort of a thread that I need to share with everybody, is that Donald Trump is an addict, addicted to his lies. He has so many codependent enablers, both in the Congress and in his army of white supremacists. The truth of the matter is that race is the lie that America was built on. And what I mean by that is it presumes that that different colors of people are different races, and that is the fundamental lie that leads to supremacy, distinction without any real difference. It leads to white supremacy, And we have to dismantle that with the truth, even though, like your caller on Tuesday, the last one you had where he was spouting all that stuff where, oh, this happened, that happened, and you were trying to tell him, no, that's the wrong, that's all a lie. Until people understand that that is the fundamental cause, the lie of race, and until we start to take the multi-generational and multinational track to understanding that lie and its effect on us, we will never find ourselves free from that sepsis of supremacy. And I just wanted to get that out and share it. And,
well, I think it's very well said, Kevin. And if I could just add to that,
sure.
The we that you and I are talking about is white people. When white people start looking at black people with an eye that views the difference between being white and being black the same way that white people have traditionally viewed the difference between being a blonde or a brunette. In other words, there's just a slight difference in the way that person looks. Yeah. But they're just as smart as I am. They're just as lovable as I am. They're just as capable as I am. They're just as human as I am. When white people get to that point, then this all goes away. But I'd say probably a large minority of white people are a hell of a long way away from that point.
You're right, but I respectfully disagree that it goes away. It has to be deinstitutionalized. You know what I mean?
Of course.
That supremacy has been built in and baked into not only, you had it on the program with your book club where the papal bull from Pope Philip, where
from the 1400s,
Yeah, from the 1400s. It's been going on for that long. So we have a 500-year history or 600-year history of treating anyone who looks like you and me, that we can sell people who look like Cory Booker or Kamala Harris or the new Senator Warnock, from Georgia. God bless Georgia, by the way. But the thing is that until we realize that we are all members of the human race and that we just happen to manifest like carrots or tomatoes or any other life form, we just manifest in different colors, and that there is no real distinction and difference. Because the African American gentleman who called in, he says, he respectfully disagreed with you and drew distinction about how even in the 50s and 60s, where we had this building of the middle.
We had legal segregation in the 50s and
black.
60s.
Yeah, well, I mean, even during that time, that was still a problem. So we got to do that. And I'm just saying.
Oh, it's always been a problem.
And what I'm saying is that we will never free ourselves from that stain of supremacy until we do that. And thank you.
And Kevin, I think the key to this is bringing people together. I know a lot of young people who have grown up knowing people of other races as co-equals are not as seriously infected with this as are people of our age. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. So John Kasich was recently on CNN talking about how Democrats need to be listening to rural America, words to that effect. No, I think Democrats need to be talking to rural America and reminding rural America that it was a Democratic president that got them Social Security. It was a Democratic president that brought electricity to rural America, the RTA through, or the REA rather through the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It was the Democratic Party who brought phones to rural America. It was the Democratic Party that brought Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and public education to rural America, subsidized all those things. Democrats don't need to be listening to rural America. They need to be talking to rural America. There's over 1,500 right-wing radio stations in rural America talking smack all the time, 24/7, and none in rural America carrying a progressive message. That's what Democrats need to be paying attention to. You can check out our new video on this over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, you were talking with an earlier caller about evidence and what it is. And evidence is not proof. Proof is a collective series of propositions that leads to a valid conclusion. The evidence may be used in a proposition to make an argument. So, in other words, that's exactly what happens in court is two opposing attorneys will use Exhibit A and make vastly different propositions about Exhibit A. And we know that Exhibit A is valid. It's true. Okay, so whether or not an evidence is vetted doesn't make the proof. And that's the problem. Without getting too esoteric or recondite.
Thank you for that distinction.
Well, yes. So you have two different types of logic. You have deductive logic, which is your top-down from general to specific, which is Aristotelian. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. You have inductive logic, which goes from the specific to the general. This is what I want to point out as to why the Trump people don't believe the courts. They have a fundamental misunderstanding of what our judicial system does. Now, you notice that when you were talking earlier in the week with a caller who said that the signatures in Pennsylvania were not validated. In almost every case, see, our judicial system is a common law adversarial system, which means two opponents go to the courtroom and the court acts as a referee, a neutral arbiter, and the jury actually determines which argument is the best. But in all these cases, the Trump team never took any opponents to court. They just came in with a complaint, said, this looks fishy, and to ask the court to do exactly what they hate when courts do is they ask the court to figure it out, and the court says, we don't do that. So, for instance, if you're going to say that these signatures were not validated, you have to say something. This city clerk failed to validate these signatures on these ballots. And the city clerk gets to say, no, and maybe get to use the same piece of Exhibit A to say, no, this is how we use Exhibit A. We're using it to make this argument. And that's what they didn't do. Can you tell me any of these cases where there was an opponent? There weren't. They just asked the court. And that's what's called an inquisitive. We have an adversarial system, and some countries in Europe have what's called a civil law system, which has an inquisitorial procedures where the court does ask questions. It does become the inquisitor. That's not what we do, and that's what the conservatives say they hate is unelected judges who legislate from the bench, and that's exactly what the hell they ask them to do.
Yeah, and that would be the Napoleonic system, wouldn't it, Paul?
Yeah, well, the civil law goes way back to Roman times. That's that's what it was.
So the point, right? But I think the point is that, and nobody is making this point well in the media, is that these 60 lawsuits that the Republicans brought were not good faith attempts to highlight problems or irregularities or remedy them or call for remedies to them. They were stunts designed to lend credibility to the big lie that the election was stolen from Donald Trump.
Right, because they didn't even follow procedure, and that's why the judges were getting very annoyed with them, because you're coming in here asking me to do something other than become a neutral referee of an argument between two adversaries. They didn't have an adversary. They just said, something's fishy here. It must be fraud. And the judge. And
I think they didn't care what the outcome of the court was going to be, and they didn't even care if they were going to get slapped down, because this was all about PR to support a big lie. Paul, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Peter in Dothan, Alabama. Hey, Peter, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. And I wanted I was watching the hearing yesterday, and I got a couple takeaways from that. And I do agree with one of your earlier callers with the discussion you and he had about unity and I, like I said, it all has to start like from the top and work its way down through the Congress and then to the people. And somebody has to start someplace. And then in order to settle the unity, I think we need to kind of start calling these people out on it about saying how.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, Peter, and we do need accountability here. Peter, thank you for the call. David in Spotswood, New Jersey. David, you have 45 seconds to the end of the hour and the end of the show. What's up?
Oh, I'll be very quick then. I just wanted to say I've been masquerading as a Trump supporter for the last 3 or 4 years, when my heart felt totally different, and I think it's very poignant that Timothy Snyder, in the New York Times article, wrote that we all need health insurance to come together. I just think that the people, I think there are people who suffered over the last 4 years listening to this trivial craziness, and someone should have done.
Yep. David, I'm sorry, we're just flat out of time. I'm sorry to cut you off, but thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It does require all of us to participate, or it's not a democracy, almost by definition. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. And thanks again for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. See you then. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.